in the chat. So I'm going to kick things off and just say good evening to everybody and welcome back to the UCD What It Takes Employability series. My name is Camille Rogers with UCD Alumni Relations, and this is the 4th episode of our spring series focusing on what it takes to start your business. We'll be hearing tonight from 2 stellar entrepreneurs and UCD alumni. First, we'll hear from John Crowley, founder of Aqus Café, Aqus Community, and partner Juggling. And then we'll have a presentation from Quinn, founder of MoShoppa and Sweat25. Afterwards, we'll have 15 minutes for audience questions, led by my colleague, Michelle Cohen, who is a careers consultant with the UCD Careers Network. So be sure to drop any questions you have into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will answer as many of them as they can at the end of the session. You can also feel free to keep availing of the chat function over on the side to chime into the conversation or add anything else. We just ask that you keep your questions in the Q&A box so that we know where to find them at the end. So finally, this session is being recorded, and if you want to revisit it at any point or have trouble with connectivity tonight, you can find it on the UCD Alumni YouTube channel starting tomorrow. There's a link to that in the chat for reference. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to John.
Well, good evening or good morning to everybody. Well, around the world, I guess it's many different times. So my name's John Crowley, and I graduated from UCD Computer Science in 1985 and have had quite a wonderful and interesting career since then, a little bit of time in Germany, ending up in the United States in a little place called Petaluma, about an hour's north of San Francisco, town of about, 50,000 people, so kind of the size of Wicklow maybe. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about not my career in computer science and programming, but more of something that I've landed on about maybe 20 years ago. And the whole kind of concept of social capital. Little bit about more background, I guess. I grew up in suburb of Dublin. My grandfather had a pub there. My dad had a pub, and my brother now has a pub. And a lot of the work that I've been doing since then has emanated from what I saw there as a teenager working as a pub. I pulled my first pint of Guinness when I was 12, probably illegal by now. But it was something that struck a chord in me. What I saw there was a community of people, a community of all different walks of life coming together under the same community, I guess community hub, if you will. So let's fast forward a little bit to me ending up in a place called Petaluma. I was working designing reservation systems for airlines and cruise lines. And it was about the time in my life we had got married and had young kids, and I was struck by a book by a sociologist by the name of Robert Putnam. I believe he's a Yale social scientist who looked at the whole idea of social capital and what it means and how we interact. And basically, what does social capital mean, first of all? We'll talk a little bit about that. It's defined as kind of the interconnectivity of social networks in a community. So what does that specifically mean? How connected are people in a community? Do they trust each other? Are they civically engaged? Are they part of the PTA? Are they part of kids' soccer groups? Are they interested in local government? And it was a study that over the last kind of 50 years of the United States, and how kind of gradually, without anybody noticing, just started declining. People stopped being part of bowling leagues. His book is actually titled, it's called Bowling Alone, which is very indicative of what had happened to modern society in general. Certainly in America, very slowly over 50 years. And what I saw, every time I used to come back to Ireland, I saw little bits of social capital get chipped away. That pub that I grew up in was bustling. It had, it was pretty much full every night. And it kind of struck me as though that kind of pub culture is disappearing. Some of it, you know, it should have, that over drinking and smoking in pubs and stuff like that was never something that could be encouraged. But we kind of forget about things that disappeared when that disappeared, was that kind of sense of community that local pub was. And so when I found myself at the, you know, married, a couple of kids, and you know, you've got to focus on your kids when you that's a whole, you know, you have to do that, and you want to do that, obviously. But there's certain parts of, certainly here being in Petaluma, that I missed. And what were they? That was like going down to the local pub and meeting my friends. Here in the United States, as many of you might know, we have bars and we've got restaurants. Restaurants you go to eat, and bars are for drinking and other kind of stuff. There's that missing point. The missing part is that kind of idea of the community center. Well, where do you meet people? Where do you meet friends? Broadly speaking, we can kind of categorize. I mean, when you're out of college a couple of years, but you can generally kind of categorize your friends and how do you make friends? How do you gather your community around you? Most of our friends are through our place of worship, if you or your place of work, or maybe through your kids. And I didn't go to church, and I worked with 3 other computer programmers, and our kids were young, and it kind of struck me as, well, how do I find people that I want to hang with? So I started this this thing called, it was an event that happened every 2 months or so, and it was called the Petaluma Pub Crawl. Now, immediately it springs to mind over drinking, that kind of thing. Not at all. In fact, it was very important to me that it was not about drinking. It was about a social event where people would gather. Everybody was invited. It was a kind of a public event, and there were themes on these events. Now, one of my favorite themes, and they change every so often, but one of my favorite themes was bring a book that changed your life. Now, if you walk into a room and everybody's got a book under their arm and they start talking about the book that changed their life, you start to really understand, well, who are these people? You start realizing that you've a lot in common. You start realizing that they actually might live around the corner from you, that you have a kid on the same a baseball team, or that you have similar interests. And that kind of creates a sense of connectedness. These events carried on for probably about 3 or 4 years until I kind of realized, well, this energy that we had been creating needed a home. So these events, they had probably about actually about 100 people on. The last one we had was about 8 or 9 years ago, with about 400 people on it. So we had, which is wonderful, but it became a little unwieldy, and none of the bars and restaurants and galleries would host us because we just got too big. But about maybe about 10, 15 years ago, actually, I started a cafe. You can look it up. It's called Aqus Café, AQUS.com. And there is where I really kind of found the success that I'm so delighted to have. It was the coffee shop that's right beside my software business that I'd been going to for about 10 years, until I decided, well, why not buy it and turn it into something that was a mixture between the pub that I grew up in and a California coffee shop. So it, although it had beer and wine, the emphasis was on creating community, and all of the events that we had there were designed to get people in conversation. Go back to that kind of the idea of social capital. On one end, you've got a community where there's high social capital, everybody is involved. The other end of the spectrum is people don't trust each other. There's an innate kind of a mistrust of people, and bringing people from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum is what social capital, or the creation of social capital, is really all about. So what, just back up a little bit, what's social capital good for, and why do we invest in social capital? Why do we, for me, it's one of the most important things in life, is having a good friend network, friend group, associates, people that you can trust, people that maybe you don't even know, but you know that they know somebody else. So the idea, I remember on one of these pub crawls I had, I overheard this conversation of two people talking to each other, and they were looking at each other and going, I think I recognize you from somewhere, don't I? And then it suddenly turned out that they were actually neighbors. Now they were back-to-back neighbors, so it's kind of understandable that they might not have met, but they met. They came out to this place called this pub crawl that I had created, and they met there. They've now since become really good friends. But the idea behind how do you build social capital is starting in, well, first of all, finding a space for people to meet. You facilitate gathering people that might not necessarily know each other, and don't even know that they have interests in common, to start a conversation. Once you start a conversation, that leads on to the next thing of building a relationship. And then when you've got good social capital, well, then the magic really starts happening. Then people really want to live there. People want to, businesses want to start there. It really is kind of something that is at the root of having a good, solid society is having good social capital. And the cafe that I created helped me enable the things that I wanted to create, which was a vibrant society. Parallel to that, we opened a member-supported non-profit organization, the core of which, of course, is creating community and building social capital. And again, I'll go back to that is well, how do you do that? And so we're social animals, but we're really bad at it. And it's enabling and facilitating that kind of work is what has really driven me. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of go back to is what are the kind of things that stopped me. I know this is about careers and going out and finding your dreams and building a business or building a life that you want to lead. And I'll go back to kind of one of the things that stopped me. We all have parts of our personality that might need addressing. And one of the things, or not personality, but makeups or whatever. One of the things that stopped me, I remember in Germany, giving up a career because I was asked to be in a more of a, I guess, an outgoing marketing role. And I was really, really, really bad at public speaking. And I know exactly where it emanated from. I had in elementary school, one of my teachers used to use as a punishment, standing up in front of the class, embarrassing me to make me behave. And trust me, you don't want to know some of the things I got up to, but I was standing up in front of the class quite a lot. And so later on in life, whenever I got up to do public speaking, suddenly my third grade teacher would just appear right in front of me. And that was a limiting factor in my life. It was kind of one of those things. It was something that I was desperately scared of, that I knew was going to affect my career and affect my personal life unless I dealt with it. So one of the things that really helped me was, well, joining Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an organization that will help you get over that fear of public speaking. And once you get over that, then you always still have it. And, it's not something that completely dissipates. And my old teacher is still somewhere there in the background, scratching away. But I've learned to deal with it. And that's one of the things that I've since learned, that when you're afraid of something, it's a good direction to go. I kind of use it sometimes as a compass to say, okay, well, this is something that I'm terrified of. I know I can probably do it, but it's something that is something that limited me. I remember maybe about 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I had this New Year's resolution of just saying yes to things that scared me. And it was kind of, we all have these kind of little voices in the back of our mind saying, no, John, you can't do this, or no, you'll fail, or whatever. And so I made this commitment to myself to, whenever somebody suggested something, that I'd blurt out, yes, okay, I could do it, before that little voice in the back of my head said, no, you can't. So that's one of the kind of tricks that I remember using as a method of helping me get over some of the fears that I had moving forward. And it's been wonderful. So since then, since I got over that fear, creating things like the cafe have been really kind of instrumental in giving myself a certain, well, just a fun, vibrant, interesting life. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about was, especially, yeah, let's go back to the cafe a little bit, because that's something that it's been in business for about 15 years. The goal of the cafe was to become one of the social and cultural centers of Petaluma. Now, I mentioned Petaluma is a size of about 40, 50,000 people. Allowing it to be a place where community happens. There's a concept called third space. So first space is your home. Your second space is your work. And your third space is anywhere where you create community, where you interact with other human beings, where you create a sense of belonging. And so there's pubs are like that, cafes are like that. This is like that. What we're looking at now, this is a community here of people, alumni, UCD alumni coming together to share ideas. It's creating relationships between people. So that cafe, we had music 5 nights a week. We have had poetry sessions. We've had, I'm just kind of looking at the list of things that we've had, civic engagement evenings. Again, everything was focused on community building. How do you build community? What part of community is important, and how do you elevate that? So we'd have evenings of mixers, get everybody in the room from Petaluma who is interested in a certain topic. And I'd get on the microphone and we'd do some speed networking. Sounded a little bit awkward at the beginning, but after you've had a couple of rounds of conversations, you start realizing that you have so many things in common that you've then kind of create a relationship. You swap a business card, and who knows what happens out of that. I remember we had a film and video evening, get everybody in Petaluma, and a surprising number of people in Petaluma are interested in film and video, get them all in the room together, and out of that came 2 documentaries and a full-length feature movie, just by the very fact of connecting, creating those relationships. Other mixers, for example, were get everybody in Petaluma who is interested in charity work, in nonprofits, in volunteering. You get them all connected, and then you raise the level of social capital in your town. Let me just check on my time. I'm gonna wrap it up a little bit earlier, because what I think is necessary is to allow Q&A. Because this I've had a whole bunch of different careers, from computer programming to running a cafe to my latest one is a thing called partner juggling. It was a corporate team building event that I developed actually for high schools, so that kids on the first day of school would, instead of learning about their curriculum and learning about their timetables, would have fun connecting with other kids in a way that might build a relationship. It might be the first time that these kids might have ever met, and to learn juggling together it is created the whole different atmosphere for the first day of Petaluma High School for many years in a row. We took that concept and brought it over the corporate level. You can look up partnerjuggling.com and you'll see a video of me teaching people how to juggle with each other, and it actually has more kind of implications into the broader kind of spectrum of working together. How do you, can you pick up the ball for somebody? Can you help somebody else learn a new skill? And then I guess about 2 years ago, I have I still have the cafe, still run Aqus Community. That's very important. We had obviously some challenges when we went into lockdown. We had to close the cafe for about 2 months. We've been going back and forth, opening and closing since then. But a lot of the community building aspect we took online. So as soon as we went into lockdown, we moved a lot of those activities that we had at the cafe, moved them onto online. So we had poetry sessions every Monday. Friday nights we had storytelling. Wednesday night we had kind of civic engagement evenings. Again, to create that sense of community that was created at the cafe, and how do you kind of bring that on to the online forum. But I think I'm going to leave it there. Well, I guess the last career that I'm involved in now, about 2 or 3 years, is I'm trying to create community around going solar. I'm now working for a solar company. You can probably see on my LinkedIn page that it's one of those things that I like kind of creating movements, helping people en masse do something together. And right now my focus is on climate. And one of the biggest things that we can all do, and I'm not trying to sell you solar, but we should all be doing this. It's kind of, we're in this climate emergency, so let's do that, and that's what I'm helping do. So I've had a wonderful career. Started off as a Unix systems programmer, ending up kind of a cafe owner and community leader, and I've had so much fun doing it. And I think it's I'll wrap it up there now and hand you back to Michelle.
Thanks. I think we're going to hand over to Ashton. Is going to come in now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're okay. That's perfect.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today, and thanks for that, John. So I graduated back in 2017 with a law degree in UCD, and it's just dawned on me that I'm almost out as long as I was in. So that's a little bit upsetting. But anyway, so I started up a company 4 years ago, literally just after graduating, called MoShoppa. So we create online stores. They're fully stocked online stores, create them in minutes to provide sustainable fundraising through e-commerce for the likes of grassroots football clubs. So I suppose the reason why I was asked here is because I haven't yet made it. I haven't had this wonderful, illustrious career like John. I'm very much still in the thick of it and working my way through a startup. And I suppose I want to show or share with you many of the mistakes that I've made over the last 4 years, so hopefully you don't make those mistakes too, but also just to kind of give you a bird's eye view from the engine room of the ship, as opposed to the crow's nest that, as I say, I'm in the thick of it. I'm 27, I'm still learning, but hopefully you'll see that there's, you'll take something away from today that, will click and hopefully drive you on to start your own business. So I suppose to start off with, and I only read this book recently, but it was a book called The Choice by Edith Edgar. And really it's all about, she survived the Holocaust. So she, at the age of 16, she was brought to Auschwitz and she survived, and she has this incredible story. And actually it's very pertinent to, the situation we're living in now with the pandemic, and that, talking about resilience and having hope and coming through it, and really, awful things that can happen. It's about how you control it in your own mind and you don't let stuff getting in on top of you. And that allowed her, or having that resilience and that mindset that she wasn't going to let this overcome her no matter what was thrown at her, that enabled her to survive, I guess, and to then go on and have a hugely successful career. So for me, looking at that from a startup, or reading it from the perspective of, I'm in a startup and stuff gets thrown at you, you think that your business is going to shoot the lights out, something happens, funding doesn't come through, and you're kind of back on your bum again, trying to get going. And so for me, seeing that, having that resilience, that grit, that determination, the work ethic that she showed kind of made me go, okay, well, yeah, I could do that too. So practical advice number one, if you haven't read that book already, I would highly recommend it. She's just a phenomenal person, and it kind of gives you a bit of perspective as well that, okay, if my startup failed, who cares? That's kind of what I got from it. So now that you're kind of mentally ready for battle, I suppose, where do you start from a practical sense? And if you don't yet have a business idea, I think, speaking to what John was talking about, finding that why about what you're doing. Simon Sinek, I think I've sent a link for the TED Talk. He also has a book, and it's It's really about, you know, finding what drives you, what can you do that's going to make the world a better place, all those things. You know, everybody wants to make money, we all want to make profit, but it's, you know, what can you do that's going to add intrinsic value to not just yourself, but to the lives around you. And so that, you know, if you don't have an idea yet, I think it's a really inspirational talk. And if you do, I'm just going to share my screen for a second. If you do have an idea, I think it can be really hard to know where to start. Certainly for me, you know, I was quite fortunate. I went into business with my dad, who had run a lot of businesses in the past, but he was probably a bit more old school and, you know, would typically said, okay, we need to put a business plan together. And these are all the different things that we need to do and need to align and get into order to go to a funder. When really Ashmore's lean canvas model that you're seeing here on the screen, I hope, what you're seeing here, it's a distilled version of a business plan, and it's so useful. You know, I think it can be, if you can get everything onto one page, you know, but you've done your research, you've looked around and you've figured out who your competitors are, actually figured out if you have a unique value proposition, you know, this idea that you have, is it going to work? You know, is there a cost structure? What kind of revenue can you make from it? What size is the market? What problems does the market have at the moment? And how are you proposing to solve it? These are all things that if you can get onto a one pager, you know, you're in good stead. So what I would say is, you know, put the undergrad to good use. You're all, you know, having come through UCD, if you're there or you're out of it now, you know how to research. So, you know, just put your thinking cap on, go back to those resources, whether it's academic literature, grey literature, look at the competitors and see where you can get to. So I think when you put it all down on paper and you go, okay, great, this is something I really want to move forward with, what is that next step? So, you know, you think logically you would say, okay, well, I have this idea, I'm going to build this idea, I'm going to get fundings for this idea, and then I'm going to push it out there and I'm going to make millions. And I've learned the hard way that that's not how that happens. So really, you know, and we've done this kind of as we move forward with projects, it's all about talking to your market and learning from them, you know, surveying people, or if you have friends, you think, you go, okay, right, I've identified an idea, it's a gap in the market, this is the market, these are the people I'm going after. Speak to those people before you spend your life trying to build something for them when you're not entirely sure whether you're completely on the money or not. And what that allows you to do is you can then build an MVP, or a minimum viable product. And it's very hard, and I'll come to perfectionism in a minute, but it's very hard, I think, for students to overcome this and say, okay, well, I don't have to, this doesn't have to be the perfect product. You know, we wouldn't submit an assignment that was only 70% complete, but that's what we're saying here. Put something together, and then you go back out to the market and go, remember how you said you wanted this, and this is, you know, you would definitely buy this if it was at this price. Here it is, what do you think? And then you can learn again, and they go, oh yeah, well, you know, I thought it was going to be blue and not red. Right, okay, right, we'll go back and we'll change it to red. And it's this cycle, this iterative cycle that you go on, is what allows you to keep adjusting and to adapt, and I suppose to stay on top of the times. So certainly with COVID, a lot of people have had to adjust and change business models entirely. But if you think about it, if you have that relationship with your market where you're speaking to them regularly, it really helps you. And certainly from a funding perspective, if you can say, yeah, we've spoken to our market, here's a bunch of data that shows that this, you know, there's a market appetite for this, it makes your funding journey an awful lot easier, which leads quite nicely then into the challenges that you face when you're starting up a business. So for me, or for our companies, funding was definitely a tough one to get to overcome, you know, to have enough money to be able to do what you want to do. And I suppose going on that journey, getting the right documentation in place is obviously key. It's important. And, you know, you're looking at your investor deck, your financial forecasts, your vision and your mission, where you want the company to go, and exit strategy, all these things that that you want to put together and you have the knowledge of, that, you know, that absolutely has to be done. But alternatively, you know, you may decide, okay, well, actually, I'm going to have a crack at this on a low budget to begin with before doing that big investment. So maybe before, you know, you've done your MVP and you're getting it out there. And just to give an example of that, so during COVID, or kind of, yeah, literally this week last year, I started a company called Sweat25, and it was a sideshow for me. It's just, you know, people were going into lockdown, or sorry, the country was going into lockdown. People were starting to lose their jobs. We weren't officially in lockdown, but sport had been stopped, which meant that a friend of mine was out of a job. He was an athletic therapist. So I created a website on Squarespace. It was off the shelf, cost €15. I connected it to Zoom, which is free, and there was a scheduling system as part of my package with Squarespace. And I connected the three and I got it out there. And within the first 6 weeks, I had over 500 clients using the system, where people were able to come on board onto the site, book a live online workout class with our instructors. So I got up to, I think it was 20 instructors coming into the summer is what we had. And so that, had I decided to get everything perfect and go on a funding journey, I'd still be there trying to get my act together. So I had to act quickly in that way. So, you know, whilst funding is obviously important, it's not always the most important thing. And I think recognizing that in Sweat25 is what actually enabled me to go on and do it. So also another issue at the start, or another challenge, is becoming a jack of all trades. So I don't know about you, but there were modules that I really didn't like. Sorry, that's unfair. That I wasn't very good at, I should probably say. Data analysis being absolutely one of those things. So I did a bit of business at the start of my degree and then just stuck with the law because I was so certain I was going to be a solicitor. But anyway, that's another day's work. So becoming a jack of all trades as a startup, you have to do the jobs that you're first of all not qualified to do, but that you don't want to do. And yes, okay, you could hire somebody to do that, but you don't have the cash flow to do that. So you have to learn new skills and you have to get stuck in and do those jobs. And you know what, it actually makes you stronger on the outset then, because once you've come through that and you are able to hire people, you kind of have half an idea of what you're talking about. You can go, well, actually, no, I understand SEO. I understand what Google rankings are, and that, you know, you can sort of speak from a better authority than perhaps you would have been able to before all those things. So certainly, you know, becoming a jack of all trades, it just enables, and, you know, you have to then step out of that then once you're in a better position. So, you know, I started out in MoShoppa, I was very much a jack of all trades. I did all the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. And now I've stepped up and I'm the CEO, but I know all of those jobs. I know what's involved in all of them. And I suppose now I really understand what it takes to move it all forward. And then, yeah, back to the perfectionism. So it is, you know, as I said, it's very difficult to not be a perfectionist. You want whatever you put out to market to be the be all and end all. You know, the world's going to pick up on it. Everyone's going to be talking about it. It's the best thing since sliced bread. But really, it's that slower, iterative approach that's more sustainable in the long run. And, you know, another thing to consider is, you know, as you're building out your network or you're bringing on advisors or people who you really respect, they may see something different in your product and suddenly you have to go a different direction to what you had planned. So being adaptive in that way, not clinging on, I think that's really important as you're getting going. And so I guess to build up your confidence, to be able to go with the flow and to adapt and to try out new things, you know, again, going back to the academic side of things, to formulate your own opinion so that you're not looking at, you know, a load of academic references to be able to you know, inform your opinion. I think it's really useful, or certainly I found it really useful, to find support networks. So you know, whether that's Ucd Alumni, you know, there's plenty of female founder ones out there at the moment that I have found really useful in Ireland, like Awaken Hub and SheUps. Going on and joining in those conversations. And you know, I couldn't have come on this you know, 6 months ago, but I've been attending more and more Zoom webinars as a participant and listening in, and you know, I don't think any webinar, well, this one, although you've had John's, I was going to say this one may be the exception, but you've certainly learned a lot from John. But you know, I always take something away from it, even if it's just one thing. I've always found it useful. But each time, you know, we get it put into breakout rooms or something, and I have to speak to somebody and tell them my story. That's building my confidence, and you, I suppose you feed off that energy and you find the people that really align with you, which, you know, again, that's hugely important. And so just, I won't keep you much longer. I just want to give a quick recap of, you know, hopefully what you will see is practical ways that, you know, if you have an idea, if you're thinking about starting your own business, that kind of gives you something to go off. So the choice, even if it's just to, you know, help you get through the pandemic, it's an incredible book. Simon Sinek's, it's well worth a watch, his TED Talk, or you can buy his book as well. The lean canvas model, you know, if you're going, right, I have an idea, let's get pen to paper. It's a good place to start. I found it a really good place to start because I've had other ideas, you know, kind of I'm always toying around with something new. And once I actually put it onto the lean canvas, I go, oh, actually, that's a crap idea. I'm not going to bother with that. And it kind of saves you an awful lot of time because you have it all in front of you on one page. You're not kind of looking through different, reams of paperwork trying to figure out whether or not it's a good idea. The validation process, I think it's just a good habit to get into, to have that relationship with your target audience so that you can understand exactly their motivations. They may not be what you think. And so just to, I suppose, on that, just very quickly, we learned through that process, we did a lot of testing in India with MoShoppa, and we learned that there was a market appetite, which was huge for us. But at the time, our system was semi-automated, so it wasn't AI at this stage. So we learned, okay, great, loads of people like it, but we can't actually service that market. So ultimately, we ended up going back to the drawing board, getting more funding in, and moving the whole thing to AI. But the funding was made that much easier to get. It was attainable because we had all that data to back it up. We had done our testing. So again, I think that's a hugely important thing to do. We didn't always start that way, but it's something that we learned to do, and it's made our lives an awful lot easier. And then the funding pack, if you are going to go down that route, you're not going to do your own thing and start off small, like I did with Sweat25, with the off-the-shelf technologies that are out there. Just to be organized, and I suppose attention to detail. What funders are looking for is that your business inside out, the market size, and what you need the funding for. So if you're asking for €100,000 to the cent, where is it going? And I think that's, I've been to plenty of funding meetings, and you very much get put on the spot with these things unless you're very prepared. But again, building out your relationships, attending these, these network events, they can help because every time that you speak to somebody, maybe you put your name into the chat and you introduce yourself and say where you're from. They're all little boosts to your confidence that you probably don't even notice. So they will all help you then, when you're sitting across from a big scary funder, you know who you are, you know what you're about, and you know what the product is that you're trying to deliver. So then, being adaptive, being ready to change with the times and not getting too caught up. As I said, you wouldn't submit an assignment 70% of the way done, but you can do that with a business. You can dip your toe in, test it, and then iterate, learn from it and iterate. Learning new skills. So sadly, become a jack of all trades. Again, maybe you can't afford to just pay people to do it all, but I think it's a really useful exercise just to fully understand every aspect of your business anyway. And then lastly, to build relationships. And I know it's super cliche to say find your tribe, but I think I have found just through going to these, particularly the female founder networks in the last while, that you find people who I'd be more than happy to meet for dinner on a night out, or go for a drink, or have a cup of coffee, anything like that. People who really align with your values and who see what you're doing and who are really rooting for you. And I think that's something about particularly the Irish entrepreneurial network, but also the likes of Ucd Alumni. People have your back, and I think that's really important. I've met people for coffees. I've had Zoom coffees with them, and these are people who I would have seen as heroes in the Irish business world, who I would have thought never would have even looked at me, let alone meet me for a one-to-one coffee for 20 minutes of their time. But I think Irish people are very good at giving back. So I'm hoping one day when MoShoppa shoots the lights out, that I'll be in that position as well. But if you are on that journey, you're thinking about starting it, you're thinking about going down that route, I would highly recommend, if there's somebody who you think can be useful to you, or who could give you the right advice, get in touch with them, reach out, and I'm sure that they will help. And I think on that note, I hope that you do go for it, particularly, people who are just finishing college, if you're still students, while you've little else to lose, that was my attitude towards it. I gave up quite a lot. Having finished my law degree, I had a training contract lined up. So that was my sacrifice, that I didn't go down that route. I chose a different path. But, I didn't have dependents. Thankfully, I'm still with my parents. They're dying to get me out. I'm not leaving yet. But it was a good time for me to do it. And if it's a good time for you, maybe there will never be a good time. But I think if it's something that's within you, you should just go for it. I mean, I'd rather not have regrets. But yeah, so thank you. I think I'll hand over to Michelle now for the Q&A.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Aisling and John. Both really great presentations, and such a lovely contrast to you both. You're both at different stages in your career journey. And I love the recommendation about the book. The choice is brilliant. So we'll give you a moment to catch your breath, Aisling, and I'll have a question here for John. The book that you changed your life evening has triggered a lot of interest in our audience. So some people are asking, what's the book that you bought to the book that changed your life evening?
Well, it was that book, Bowling Alone, by that sociologist, Robert Putnam. And it literally did change my life, because it was a study. I mean, it's a heavy book, 900 pages, and a lot of it is graphs, and it's a sociological study. The parts that I read, not being a sociologist, were kind of the beginning and a little bit of the middle, and mainly the end. And it struck me as it was a study on how the demise of social capital is happening, but it wasn't a study on, well, what do you do about it? And that's kind of what I took was, well, okay, we've got this bad thing that's happening to our society, our culture. What do you do about it? And so pretty much ever since then, most of my life has been centered around doing something about social capital.
Very good, very good. Just as regards both, this is to both of you around, it's a question from Enda, around just conquering that self-doubt, because you're both, like, I suppose, putting yourselves out there to set up your own business. So Enda saying you probably both kind of had that kind of maybe self-doubt, that internal critic, hard to escape it. And how do you manage that or deal with that? So maybe Aisling, would you have a tip, and we'll come back to John?
Yeah, of course. I suppose it's ongoing for me. You know, I even sharing this, that I was doing this talk, sharing it across my social network, I was like, oh God, you know, people are going to see it. What are they going to think? Who's your one? Who does she think she is, trying to be something? Do you know what? I think if you're doing something that you fully believe in, it becomes easier. You know, when I'm talking about MoShoppa, I don't feel like I'm trying to sell something. I'm just talking about, you know, what I'm doing at the moment, and it's what I love. And so I've really found the thing that makes me tick. You know, it's online shopping, it's to do with grassroots football clubs. You know, I come from a sporting family, so it really aligns with what I want to do. And then in terms of the confidence piece, I think I'm always going to have self-doubt, and if I ever get as arrogant that I don't, then, you know, something bad has happened, and I should revisit that. But I do think, you know, building up your network, but, you know, talking to people, attending meetings. So one of the things when I first, you know, I was literally fresh out of college. My dad, who I was in business with, still am, he took me to every single meeting. So every investor meeting, whether it was with the bank, whether it was down to the tax advisor, everybody. And he made me sit there, and then he'd make me speak. He'd ask me a question, or he'd tell me to answer something. Here he is. He's actually just walked in right in the middle of my webinar. This happens every day. I was just singing your praises. I'm going to stop now.
Sorry, my apologies. Sorry.
It wasn't one of the dogs. Yeah, so he pushed me, and he brought me out of my comfort zone. And you know, actually, John, you made a great point. You said, you know, saying yes to things. You know, I'm going to start doing that more. I think that was absolutely great advice as well.
Very good. Thanks, Aisling. And John, the same to you.
Yeah, it was funny because I you know, in my 20s, I kind of looked at these people who are, you know, successful in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and kind of thought, gosh, well, they've gotten rid of that little voice in the back of their head, but it doesn't go away. You just learn to manage it a little bit better. And that's kind of what I've found. And then you kind of look at, as I mentioned, I joined Toastmasters because I had that huge voice that was preventing me from developing things in my career, social and personal life, that I knew I had to deal with. And you take that on, and you know your pain points. You know what's gone on the back of your head. We all have them. We all have these voices that tell us that we can't. And you know, there's certain aspects that you can address. Public speaking was one of mine.
Very good. And just in relation to, I suppose, challenges when you started to set up your cafe, what advice would you give to somebody? Just lessons learned if you were doing it all again.
Gosh, lessons learned. I really was quite blessed in how the cafe happened. It pretty much fell into my lap. there was through the community building work that I had done before that, it was pretty much a given. And I remember the first weekend when I got the keys on Friday morning. We had about 40 or 50 people from the community come to help me repaint the place. So we spent the weekend repainting the entire inside. We opened it up Monday morning. It was and I know you talked about it as well. It's building relationships. It's finding the people that will support you. And I mean, people want you to succeed. So I had a community of people who I have people showing up the door. How can I help? How can I, because they saw that I was doing something that had integrity and that was going to also affect their lives as well, positively. So everybody was really interested in making sure that it was a positive and a successful venture.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Aisling, a question for you. So something in the careers network that we would always be recommending is to reach out to people. As you mentioned, I think Irish people talk about their roles and they're very happy to help, but it's daunting for a student to do that. And would you have any advice or tips? I know you mentioned like some of the networking events that you attend, but do you use, for example, LinkedIn? And would you ever kind of connect with people like that and start conversations?
Yeah, I've become very cheeky. So if there's a speaker at a particular event, there was one recently at Awaken Hub, and I sent, I loved your talk, would love to connect. And so you can kind of find a common ground with somebody. So maybe it's, oh, I see you studied such and such at UCD. I'm also a UCD graduate, would love to connect. And so finding that thing that brings the two of you together. And I think, yeah, you have to have a bit of balls about you and just, be persistent as well. But yeah, do you know what? Some people might never get back to you, but somebody might, and it might change your life. So, what have you got to lose?
Very good. So use flattery. Flattery works. Okay, very good. And Aisling, this is another question actually that's coming in for you, because it's a current UCD student and they have their own small online business, but they're really kind of struggling to figure out their price point. Is something too cheap or too expensive? And would you have tips maybe about, should they do a little bit of market research, or a kind of any tips that you would have for that? They're just kind of struggling where to kind of put their price point.
Yeah, I've been down this road as well, and you can do it a couple of ways. You can look at your costing and say, okay, well, it costs me X to run this, so therefore I need to make Y on every product that I sell. Or, if it's a particular SKU item, or if it's something in particular, it's your cost point around that, you can say, right, well, I want to make a 20% margin on it. Another thing to look at is your competitors. So by looking at a competitive analysis, conducting that and seeing, and not just direct competitors, but a bit broader as well, and looking at other things that your customers are interested in and what they're buying and what those pricing points are, it can kind of give you a sense. And I think you'll find a happy medium. If something, we find we ran free trials, and that's great, but then when it came to converting them for $20, people were like, actually, no, we don't want to pay for this. So they weren't good enough leads for us. So I think there's a happy medium where people who, when they're paying for it, they'll see a value in it. And that, obviously if they're handing you your credit card, then that's obviously, you've got them. They're a really good lead to have. So yeah, I would suggest a competitive analysis, really and dig deep, and don't be afraid to look internationally, go as big as you can. And then also look at your costs and say, right, well, what do I need to make?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. I hope that answers your question. So John, for you, Brian is wondering just about how you managed, I suppose, to juggle so many active projects. Does your involvement kind of lessen once an idea is up and running, to allow you to focus on other projects? How do you manage?
I was very, very fortunate to have a software career that landed me with you probably know the company Datalex. It's an Irish company. I ended up working for them for a circuitous route, and then ended up going out on my own with a reservation systems for cruise lines that was happily in maintenance mode. So it gave me a lot of free time. It was in maintenance mode, so they paid me some chunk of change to make sure it didn't go wrong, and it didn't go wrong very often, which was nice. So it gave me that freedom to invest my time in creating the cafe and creating the Aqus community, work, the Aqus Community nonprofit organization. It's not something that I feel as though I have to juggle, because they're all in the same realm of creating community and building social capital. Yeah, I have a busy life, but you know, juggling helps. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's just you do what you can, and you know, certain things drop by the wayside, and it's the interest level that keeps me going. Is connecting people, building community. It's just, yeah, I guess I'm busy. Yeah, ish.
Okay, very good. And then just this is to both, have you both availed of mentors? So I know, Ashton, you've mentioned like a lot of the kind of networking events that you've attended. Have you sought out any particular mentors or even role models that you've followed in Irish business or international business? Apart from your dad, I know you've mentioned your dad.
Get him. He's in the doghouse now. Yeah, particularly I find as a young woman fresh out of college, and a lot of the time, and it just seemed to be the way that I go into a room, and you know, if there was 10 people, there would probably be 9 men or 8 men. And so I kind of sought out women because I figured, okay, they've been through that process or that journey, and they've figured out how to navigate that kind of male-dominated business place. So yeah, so Sonia Flynn is a lady. She was a former CEO of Facebook back, and then she moved on to SoundCloud in Berlin. She worked in Google in the early days. So she's a phenomenal Irish businesswoman, and so she was really good to me. She was really kind. Another is Felicity McCarthy, and I believe she does a bit with UCD, and she was on the marketing side. And so, you know, another was Claire Penny. So Claire Penny did she spoke at an event with my dad, and I got speaking to her afterwards, and she said, "I'm doing another event next week. I want you to do it, not your dad." And so that kind of, I was like, oh God, why? I have nothing to say. But so I think finding those people, again, you know, I sought them out and I asked them for help, and they were only too willing.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Brilliant. John, for you?
I was kind of scratching my head, kind of thinking, are there any people that I can kind of put my finger on? Specifically, you know, in that idea of kind of building community that I kind of started 20 years ago, there weren't that many people who knew what the term social capital was, and then kind of dedicated their lives towards building community. I mean, who does that? Who pays for somebody? Is there a department of building community in most governments or even kind of cities? And I think definitely, absolutely, sometime in the future there will be a community development. I mean, there are things called community development centers now that actually just build houses. But looking at the kind of the infrastructure and how people develop social capital is something that there will be a head of social capital creation in most communities, I hope. So people who I guess have inspired me are, I guess, brave people, you know, people who have just kind of broken the mold and said, I'm just going to do it. Doesn't matter what you think of it. If you do it with integrity and for the right reasons, it doesn't really matter what other people say or think about you.
Very good, very good. There's been lots of questions, but this is the most time that I've seen lots of people just leaving lovely comments to both of you, and they just loved your stories. And some people just commenting how like they really resonated with your story and appreciated your advice. So that's really nice to hear. People just sometimes like to listen and enjoy your stories. So there is some more questions, so I might try and get to answer those myself and as best I can, just people looking for information and resources. But I'm conscious of time, so I know Camille has some kind of information she wants to share with the audience as well. But just thank you both for answering those questions so frankly and sharing your presentations. They were really enjoyable. So I'll have you, Camille.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And yeah, just to echo everyone's comments, those are 2 amazing presentations. And I really enjoyed just personally the variety of perspectives and stories between the two of you. So thank you so much again for your time. And thank you, Michelle, for the amazing steer, as always, with our Q&A section. For those of you who haven't heard this before, if you're a student or have graduated from UCD in the past 2 years, you can always take advantage of the many events and consultant advice through the UCD Careers Network. So there's a link being posted in the chat for that resource. And in terms of other resources you've asked for, hopefully we'll have a couple for you right now to be able to avail of. So to start with, the theme of connecting through LinkedIn, if you'd like to connect with John or Aisling on LinkedIn after this session, the links to their profiles are being posted in the chat right now after that great expert advice on building your network and community. You can also find slides from today's presentations and the other resources that were linked in the chat in the What It Takes resource hub on the UCD Alumni Network. So you can access that hub in the Alumni Network in the chat here as well. And just a few final notes on some upcoming events before we wrap up this evening. In terms of this series, you might be interested in our next What It Takes webinar, which is all about what it takes to land a job overseas. That's happening on Tuesday, 16th March, and it'll lead us right into St. Patrick's Day. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for this and check out the rest of the series in the link in the chat. Also, we have a webinar kicking off right after this at 7 p.m. tonight. So if you're looking for something more to listen into, UCD Business Alumni Relations invite you to join Niall Breslin for a live keynote talk entitled How to Find Peace in the Chaos of the Modern World. So if you want to register and tune into that, the link is being posted in the chat as well. And if you're here with us after UCD Women in Leadership last week, you might be interested in this next webinar on International Women's Day. So to mark the occasion next week, we have Frances Fitzgerald, MEP, discussing the gender impacts of COVID-19 in our next UCD in Conversation webinar. As with the other events, the link is being posted in the chat if that's of interest to you. And in other announcements, I'd also like to let you know that we have open nominations for this year's UCD Alumni Awards. These awards celebrate the achievements of 9 of our exceptional alumni, and we invite you to submit a nomination for this year's awards by heading to the link in the chat. And finally, this series aims to support our UCD community with career development opportunities, but we'd also like to mention our commitment to supporting our students through the COVID crisis as well. Generous funds have been raised thanks to alumni and friends of UCD like you. So if you'd like to support our efforts to provide urgent financial and mental health support to those students who need it most, you can visit the link in the chat here as well. So that's all from us. Thank you so much again for joining us this evening, and we'll hope we'll see you again next time. Take care.